Hello everyone, and welcome back to Void Dwarf Studios. Today we do an episode that I've been looking forward to do for a while. We are going back to the world that was, Warhammer Fantasy. So, this is going to be an overview, much in the same vein as the previous ones that I've done. I will go into each one of the factions, I will give you a brief description on what they are, who they are, how they fight, and we will go on to a more history-focused video in the future. I'm not going to lie, I've been quite excited about doing this one for a while. Warhammer Fantasy is the tabletop wargame that got me into wargaming. I did 40k first, which I did a little bit of, and I quickly got bored at the time. Don't get me wrong, I do love 40k now, I very much enjoy playing that system, but it was just the fantasy elements that caught my attention early on. And Warhammer Fantasy is what I then saw, and ever since then, my Britannians, my Dwarfs, I played a little bit of the Vampire Counts, but the Warhammer world is fan-frickin-tastic, and I cannot wait for GW to bring it back. I have previously mentioned in another video my concerns, because, well, they did kind of thoroughly kill it, so it'd be interesting to see how they decide to revive it, whether they do a complete reboot and start it from the beginning, or if they continue from the end times. Who knows? Either way, it's going to be interesting. So, without further ado, let us dive into the world that was. Let us dive back into Warhammer Fantasy. One of the endearing things that I've always enjoyed about Warhammer Fantasy, and 40k shares many of these, as 40k came from Warhammer Fantasy, GW basically went, can we just put all the Warhammer Fantasy races in space? And they basically did that. That was how 40k initially was. But to put it in perspective, all the races and factions and groups in Warhammer Fantasy, there is no good guy, bad guy. Like, the closest you can get is there is the eternal struggle against chaos, which, if chaos wins, it sucks for everyone. But to call the Empire good guys, or Britannians, or Dwarves, that's it's a little bit of a stretch. They're all a bit too complicated to be fit into the purely good guy, bad guy formula. And that's one of the things I loved. Even though I could play an army of chivalric Britannian knights, they also ride past the downtrodden peasants who they thoroughly, I know that they're not meant to mistreat them, but let's be honest, the peasants have a pretty horrible life. And this is the kind of contradictions that I really enjoy. These are the things that make Warhammer Fantasy fascinating for me. Even if you start talking about races like the Orcs or Beastmen or, hell, Dark Elves, for example, they're not evil, quote unquote. I mean, the closest you could call to evil is just they do horrible things, but they don't think they're doing horrible things. Like, Orcs fight everything because they want to get bigger and stronger. As far as they're concerned, getting bigger and stronger is the right and proper thing to do. Dark Elves don't think they're evil. They believe that the High Elves usurped their homeland and they're trying to take it back. And they're prepared to do whatever it takes to do it, including some morally dodgy things. The Beastmen don't think they're evil because, as far as they're concerned, they're worshipping chaos, and as far as they're concerned, that's the only right and proper thing to do. But anyway, as I started talking about humans, let's begin with humans. In terms of size, the Empire is the largest human civilization. Britannia comes second, and then further south you have Talea, and to the east you have Nippon and Cathay. We don't know a lot about Nippon and Cathay, only that they are, I suppose you could call them parallels to India and China and Japan. But as far as we are aware, the Empire is the largest human civilization. They have a lot of similarities between the Holy Roman Empire and, the Empire. They speak a form of language known as Reichsspiel, which has German elements, but it isn't German. I'm going to make that very clear. It's not German. And they are ruled by an emperor, who is known as Karl Franz, or at least the last emperor of the Empire was known as Karl Franz. There have been a number of emperors, some really, really good, some horrendously terrible, depending on the emperor, depending on how well the Empire seemed to work. They have a complicated legal system. They are very Renaissance in terms of their technological expertise. You got your guns, you got your cannons, and they've even got a steam tank, which is an evil thing to stop at the best of times. And they are very progressive. The Empire are more often than not at the forefront of the main Warhammer story, as this is the Empire where Sigmar Heldenhammer, the dude who's now a god in Age of Sigmar, essentially formed the Empire. He started it because he rescued a dwarf called Kurgan Ironbeard, and he was given a magical hammer called Gal Moraz, the cool little hammer symbol that you often see in the Warhammer's logos and iconography. But essentially, this is the land that starts the true resistance against chaos for humanity. We'll get to the elves in a minute, because they are also very much involved in the fight against chaos. Before I move on, I will give you a quick basic understanding of their army. They have gun lines, as in muskets, cannons. They have pikemen and shields and spears and swords. They have magic. They have a college of magic, so you can have all kinds of wizards. It gives you a nice, colourful looking army. And you can have either a group of religious nutters called warrior priests, who give you all kinds of fun bonuses and buffs. You can have your Empire generals, you can have your engineers. They are a very technologically minded group on the whole. The Empire is split into multiple provinces, which all have their different identities and histories, and they're all very colourful. I will try and get into them at some point. And they're probably the strongest human faction that fights against chaos. Next, on the human factions, we have my favourite, the beloved Britannians, the chivalrous knights, along with their downtrodden, beaten, and often badly abused peasants. Very much an Arthurian mix of French and English styles of nobility. These guys are your classical chivalrous knights in shining armour, all looking for the Grail to become Grail Knights. They have a religious code where they follow the Lady of the Lake, and these guys are a wonderful contradiction. They're probably one of my favourite factions in Warhammer Fantasy. They both emphasise the best in what chivalry is meant to do, and yet they also are terrible at it. There is one hell of a contradiction in how they treat each other, as well as how they follow the Lady of the Lake, compared to how they treat their peasants. Yeah, that's not fun. You don't want to be a peasant in Britannia. That sucks. But they are, without a doubt, one of the, if not the second strongest, human nation in the Warhammer Fantasy world. Their last king was Luin Leonker, or for us English-speaking people, Luin the Lion-Hearted. He was a pretty cool dude. He, on the whole, was all the things that you would hope a king to be. He was generous, he was understanding and kind, both to peasantry and nobility alike. And he was apparently one of the purest people on the planet. He was so chivalrous that, in fact, he never told a lie in his life, which I'm not entirely sure I believe, but his actions certainly spoke louder than words. The way you play Britannians is you have, basically, instead of troops being your main front line, you have cavalry, and you have a fantastic choice of cavalry, in fact, arguably some of the best and most numerous in the old world. You have flying cavalry, you have giant hippogriffs cavalry, you've got the purebred Bretonnian warhorse that doesn't suffer minuses because of heavy armour, because this is literally what they're bred for. And your peasants, men-at-arms, and various other people who are foot-slogging it are more there in a supporting role. You could arguably call your peasants they're the speed bump, except they're not much of a speed bump. They're there basically to tie something down for a turn, maybe two, if they're feeling particularly heroic, whilst the knights get into position and then charge whatever's charged the poor peasants. And the knights will get all the glory, and the poor peasants will maybe get paid. Maybe. You never know. From something chivalric and, in theory at least, noble, to something just the complete polar opposite. We're now going to talk about the Warriors of Chaos and their demonic allies. I'm going to put them both together because, well, they are more or less on the same side. Although I suppose the Chaos Gods are more in it for the fun and the giggles than the humans and other races who are trying to fight for chaos. They're in it for immortality. Selfish stuff like that. Up in the far north, or the far south, is a Chaos Gate. Essentially, this is a portal for which chaos stuff can enter into the world. It's a bit complicated, but I will explain it properly in the lore video. Essentially, back in the beginning of the world, chaos flew over all of the Warhammer Fantasy world, corrupting, changing, and doing all kinds of other fun things to the natural environment. And due to the efforts of many of the other races and their gods, they managed to push chaos back to the North and South Poles, leaving just the Chaos Gates. Now, those who follow chaos are inevitably in it for very selfish reasons. They want to get more glory, they want to explore hedonism, they want to just have lots of weird kinky sex. It's they're it's not a these are not the good guys by any stretch. They're in it for very selfish reasons. In fact, these are the closest to the bad guys that you can find in the Warhammer Fantasy world. In the end times, they were led by the ever-chosen champion of chaos, basically the dude that all 4 chaos gods that I've talked about previously, Slaanesh, Nurgle, Khorne, and Tzeentch, have chosen to elect as their chosen champion, and he was Archaon the Ever-Chosen, who wrecked so much stuff and brought about the end times. So you play chaos because you like big, heavy armor, you like crazy mutations, you like chaos demons, you like an army that's literally there for the destruction. Not necessarily because they find it fun, but just because they like being unpleasant people. And to cap that all off, you have access to things like demons. You've got your Viking barbarian looking fellas who are known as Norskans, kind of your chaff infantry, I want to say, although they're much better than peasants. Yeah, way better than peasants. These are your barbarian hordes, your destroyers of civilizations. These are the guys you play if you enjoy that kind of thing. As we started this video talking about men, let's move on to the, next closest thing to men we got, I suppose. Beastmen, in fact. These are unfortunate people who were basically corrupted by chaos from the very beginning. When chaos swept over the world, like I previously mentioned, it corrupted, changed, and mutated all kinds of things, the most stable of which is the Beastman. Essentially an amalgamation of, man and beast, fairly self-explanatory. They are very, very, very violent race. They tend to live in the forests around the Warhammer world. They do not like civilization in any way, shape or form, and they worship the Chaos Gods fanatically. They are so fanatic that they just don't innovate. They hate order in so many ways that they won't even make their own weapons half the time. Like, the closest they'll get is maybe tying a rock to a spear. The only reason they have metal weapons or armor is they tend to steal it off other people, which they consider fair game, You didn't make it, you stole it, that's better. You play Beastmen because you enjoy ambushing people, because you love the mix of the fantastical and the horrific. You've got all kinds of monsters and dudes with massive weapons, and these guys have a lot of attitude. They kind of get beat down a lot in the lore, but Beastmen are very dangerous. In fact, the only real reason they haven't conquered the Warhammer world is primarily because, they can't cooperate with each other, because cooperation is a bit too much like organisation, and they don't like that either. And speaking of races that struggle with cooperation, and these guys are only marginally better at it, the Greenskins, the Orcs and Goblins. I love these guys. Their whole shtick is that they're violent football hooligans. That was their original basis. You can see it when you read some of the lore. That's where the original idea kind of comes from. They Orcs believe that the most important thing in the world is to get bigger, stronger, beat up bigger, stronger things, and therefore by being bigger and stronger, you are, as I've said previously, the best. And the goblins like to stay alive and, prefer if the orcs do most of the fighting and they get to do any sneaky stabbing stuff. You play orcs and goblins because you like, again, more monsters, more ludicrous craziness, because the orcs are quite funny. They have fun rules, which means that they beat each other over the head if the unit thinks about running away. You have goblins with all kinds of sneaky magic, and you have giants and trolls and all kinds of interesting and fantastical creatures. Again, the orcs are one of the most numerous races in the Warhammer Fantasy world, much like the Beastmen. In fact, they probably outnumber the Beastmen, I would imagine. But, again, the main reason why they've never conquered the world is they're too busy fighting each other. And that's part of what makes it glorious. In fact, the closest thing to a leader that the orcs have would be Grimgor Ironhide, and even then, as big and mean and nasty and funny as heck as he is, He's not the leader. The Orcs have no real the leader. In the end times, Grimgor managed to bash everyone over the head until they all started paying attention to what he was doing, but frankly, most of the time, Orcs don't follow one leader. It's very, very rare that you'll get an Orc who can actually get to the top and do this. And I think there's only been a handful that have been able to achieve it. And so, yeah, Orcs are having more fun fighting one another, just as much as they have fun fighting humans, the elves, the dwarves, and not so much elves. They're not a fan of elves, but everyone else. Now we can move on to something slightly different, something a little more heavily armoured, and something very much more beardy. Dwarves. The Warhammer Fantasy Dwarves are... I love these guys. Essentially, they are the parent who will hold on to a grudge until the end of time. But not just the end of time. Their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren will hold on to that grudge, and will make sure it is settled one way or the other. This is why the dwarves, even though they might be able to lend more of a hand, won't because of some misspoken thing said thousands of years ago. Yeah, the dwarves were once a mighty empire that ruled pretty much the entire Warhammer world, except for the bits that the elves had, back in the good old days, as the dwarves would probably say. But there was a fantastic war called the War of Vengeance, or the War of the Beard, depending on which race you asked, where the dwarves and elves fought and broke one another, basically. Although the dwarves won. Let's make this absolutely clear. The Dwarven King, Starbreaker, killed the Elf Prince, took his crown as payment for all the trouble that he'd caused, and unfortunately for the dwarves, that's when the Skaven Greenskins basically started overrunning their holds as their armies were depleted and, well, they weren't really able to push them back. And ever since then, the dwarves have been slowly declining. Still very much a powerful military in of their own, you will play a dwarf player because you will laugh as people charge into your units, realise they haven't broken them, and not only that, the dwarves are now hitting you back with large hammers, axes, cannons, and your fantastic slayers who can fell dragons and demons. The dwarves are a fun army, and very much one that I'm looking forward to coming back in Warhammer Fantasy, if only for the beards. Now for something that's not quite as furry as a beastman, but definitely furry enough to be a rat. The Skaven. These little critters of the Under Empire are all about breaking down and destroying civilization. They're not really in it for chaos, they're not really in it for anyone else except for themselves. You will never find a more deplorable bunch of backstabbing, knife-wielding, poison-throwing, monster-creating, warp magic shenanigans that the Skaven are. These are the guys who in the end times decided to bring down the moon on the Lizardmen because they were worried they were going to lose. They are cowardly, they are numerous, they outnumber probably every single race on the Warhammer world, and again, the main reason they haven't conquered the Warhammer world is because they're too busy eating, backstabbing and fighting one another. They're wonderful for that. You all play Skaven because fantastical inventions, monsters, hordes of rat men, plague, poisons and diseases, and just the fact that they tend to screw themselves over by the madness of their own inventions. These little critters are going to be interesting to see back in Warhammer Fantasy. And I think they're a surprisingly loved faction considering how truly horrible they are to one another. Their society is run by the Council of 13 of the sneakiest, smartest, stabbiest, backstabbing, unpleasant people you will ever meet in your life. And this is how the society is run. Everything bad you could think of is encouraged in Skaven society. If you can get away with something by backstabbing, then that is precisely the way you do it. The Skaven word for friend doesn't exist. There are no friends, only people who are going to backstab you later. And the Skaven army gives you lots of opportunities to play it in, well, multiple ways. You can either go big monster heavy with the Clan Mulder and their giant creatures. You can go with the Clan Eshin and you have ninja rats. Yes, there are ninja rats. Or you can go with Clan Scryer and their technological inventions, such as the Doom Wheel. Or you can go with the Plague Monks, these disgusting, filthy creatures that love hurling diseases at you, and poisoned wind mortars, and the Screaming Bell, and all kinds of horrible plaguey goodness. These guys, when they have united, have almost brought down the Warhammer world, and it's only thanks to the fact that they're cowardly little creatures that they don't do more damage. Right, now that I've spoken about the Skaven, and I've mentioned elves once too many times, I suppose I need to get into them, don't I? Starting off with the High Elves. These are the residents of the island world of Uthran, the home place of all elves. Whether you're dark, wood, or light, this is where all elves originally came from. The main difference between these elves and Tolkien elves is these elves are even more arrogant. The High Elves basically believe they are the best thing to come out of the old world ever, and are more than willing to prove it in every single theatre of war, or art, or diplomacy, or whatever. The High Elves believe they are the best at everything. And, well, sometimes it is a little tricky to argue with them, purely because they were instrumental in saving the Warhammer world, at least the first time Chaos tried to come into it, and they won't let you ever forget it. The High Elves are led. They have a king who doesn't actually have a model yet, called Finnebar the Seafarer, but the main heroes in the High Elf army are Tyrion and Teclis, the twin brothers who are opposite ends in terms of their skills, Tyrion being a master warrior of ludicrous skill, and Teclis being the master mage. There are many other heroes, of course, but these are the two that tend to feature most prominently. If you're playing High Elves, then it's because you like Poncy shielded spirit. Sorry, let me be fair to them. If you're playing High Elves, it's because you like a broken arsehole. No, that's not right either. Okay, if you play High Elves, it is because you like their fantastic creatures, such as their dragons, you like their nobility, you like their shining armour, you like their gleaming spears, their phoenix guard, their white lions, and their white lion chariots. Those things are pretty awesome. And you love a mix of magic and martial prowess that is unmatched in the old world. You will be hard-pressed to find an army that's more skilled than a High Elf one. Even their militia spearmen are superior to anything the humans can muster up. So, from the High to the Dark. The Dark Elves are, well, just as arrogant as the High Elves, but even worse. The High Elves might be arrogant, but they are on the whole tending to lean towards a noble side. They do want to try and do good deeds, on the whole. Dark Elves? No. They, as far as they're concerned, the High Elves are usurpers. They stole their homeland from them, and so from Naggarond, which is where they now live, they launch raids into the old world, capturing slaves, valuables, and just making themselves as comfortable as they can. They have a very slave-like economy. They have a very slave-driven economy, which means that they just have to keep getting more slaves. And, slaves make work easy for the Dark Elves, who can then pursue, well, whatever pleasant things they want to, be it in some form of worship to Sunesh in one way or another, or just, stabbing people up they don't like. They are led by the Witch King and his mother, Morathi. These two are an unpleasant pair at the best of times, and yeah, you're collecting a Dark Elf army because you also like broken. No, hang on. You're collecting a Dark Elf army because you like the similar things in High Elves, but you want them spiky, and you want them to have even more fantastic creatures. You've got your dragons like the High Elves, but you've also got manticores and hydras, and you've got assassins and crazy witch elves. And you've got the Avatar of Cain. Yeah, that thing. That's not fun. You don't want to fight that if you can help it. Finally, and my personal favourites, the Wood Elves. Almost as arrogant as the High Elves and the Dark Elves, the Wood Elves are more centralised into the forest of Athel Loren. This is close to the borders of Bretonnia and the Empire. The Wood Elves really just want to be left alone. They are happy in their woodland home. They only tend to come out when there's an existential threat, such as beastmen or chaos, and they will defend their home fiercely with both arrows, mighty tree creatures and dryads, and they are more in touch with the natural world around them. They are led by the avatar of Koronos, the god of the wild, called Orion, and Alariel. She is the protector and mother to the Wood Elf people. If you're fighting Wood Elves, you're going to get shot at. A lot. by many different angles, in many different ways, and if you survive all that, you're then going to be punched by a treeman. These guys are fantastic archers, masters of ambush, and you will play them because you have an affinity for trees. You tree-hugging hippie, you. Now for something distinctly not in touch with nature, well, most of them anyway, ogres, or the ogre kingdoms as they're called. Massive humanoid bipedal creatures who have an inexhaustible taste for food, who constantly are enjoying violence, mostly on unfortunate weaker people, and yeah, just bashing everything over the head with a big enough mallet. That's how the ogres view life. They tend to live out around near the Mountains of Morn, between Cathay and the Empire. In fact, this is where they make most of their money because they tend to raid caravans, or they tell them they have to pay a toll, or get raided anyway. Ogres are not particularly bright, but they make up for that in sheer mass and stubborn stupidity, and, well, brute strength. There are very few things that can actually kill an ogre in one go. They are just that big. Those guts are muscle, more than fat, and an ogre army, whilst very, very small, arguably the smallest in terms of model count army you will ever play, these guys are more than tough enough to bash their way through anything. And in case an ogre wasn't bad enough, you can also have massive rhinos, or mammoths that shoot ice, or kitty cats, which are called saber tusks. Yeah, they're pretty crazy. Hell, ogres carry cannons as a sidearm. These guys are bonkers. But they are a ton of fun to play, just not a lot of fun to play against, because they are very hard to break due to their high toughness, high number of wounds, and, well, yeah. But they are a fantastic looking army, and full of character. Now, we've covered most of the things that are alive, let's cover some things that are dead. Starting off with the Tomb Kings. If you love the movie The Mummy, well, this faction is all for you. This faction is full of mummies, skeletons, and interesting constructs created by the Tomb Kings and their priests. The Tomb Kings were a human civilization long before the Empire, and were at the crowning stage of their glory until a certain douche called Nagash, who you may remember in a previous video, basically managed to, well, ruin everything for everyone. He tried to do a great spell which was intended to make everyone in the world dead, which he could then raise as undead under his control, but thanks to the furry Skaven, this spell backfired, and the Tomb Kings were the result. Sentient Tomb Kings, and as well as their troops being, for the whole most part, mostly sentient. If you like an Egyptian feel, and you love the mummy movies, and you want to have cool constructs like stone statues, you've got the obelisks, you've got scorpions, yeah, the Tomb Kings are going to be for you. And they are not quote-unquote bad guys. They just view the other races as being people who are trying to conquer their territory that they believe is rightfully theirs. They tend to be a defensive army more than an attacking one, in terms of the lore at least, because most of the time they're just trying to protect what's theirs. And now for something that's distinctly not that defensive, the Vampire Counts. One of the creatures created from Nagash. The vampires are, well, they're humans, but, you know, they're vampires. There's no Twilight nonsense. These are the Bram Stoker vampires who you can have multiple flavours of, in fact. You have either the vampire that's a Strigoi, which is a horrific monster with mass muscle, teeth and violence, or you can have the Von Carsteins, the charismatic, beguiling, charming vampire. The Vampire Counts are mostly around the once Empire province called Sylvania, but the vampires are everywhere. They're in almost every single human nation around the world. Not so much elves, as elves don't seem to turn into vampires, and dwarves apparently taste really, really bad. But in any case, vampires can be all over the world, in all different flavours, in all different cultures, wherever humans are. They don't really have a leader, because vampires are very individualistic, and they like to retain their own independence and control, but there have been several vampire counts who have risen up and, well, claimed the title of Emperor of the Undying. One of these was Vlad von Carstein, probably the most successful and best out of all the vampires, in my opinion, But then you had Conrad von Carstein, Manfred von Carstein, who is currently still alive, well, at least thanks to the end times he's alive, and he's in Warhammer Age of Sigmar. Manfred, that little git. I'll explain why he's a git in another video, but vampires on the whole don't have a unifying leader, as they're much more concerned in ruling their own mini-kingdoms, or just staying out of the way of the witch hunters. Yes, the vampires come in all kinds of flavours, and it's one of the reasons that I actually started, collecting them as a faction, and until the whole end times things happened. You have your noble vampires, such as the blood dragons, just to put a little bit extra on top of there, and, vampires raise armies of the undead. They coerce or corrupt humans into their service. You will play a vampire count army because you want to lead an army of monsters. You've got your ghouls, you've got your zombies, your skeletons, you've got horrific creatures like Varghulfs, think a bat on steroids. You have zombie dragons, you've got terrorgeists, you have a cornucopia of incredible monsters at your beck and call. The vampire themselves are terrifying opponents in close combat as well, just in case you were at all concerned. And last, but by no means least, we have the Lizardmen. Right, Lizardmen. Do you like dinosaurs? Of course you like dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are awesome. Do you like dinosaurs that have magic? Yes, that sounds good, doesn't it? Do you like dinosaurs with frog people who throw magic? And a distinctly Aztec theme? Well, these are your boys. The Lizardmen have been around basically from day one, created by the old ones to, prevent chaos from coming into the world. They kind of failed at that. But they are a very powerful army and a powerful race in of themselves. They are led by their Slan Mage Priest, the big frog dude that you saw on the floating platform there. And they live predominantly in Lustria, which is the South America and of the Warhammer world. You are collecting Lizardmen because you like a nice big brawly army full of fantastic creatures like dinosaurs and Triceratops and T-Rexes, and you also like magic, because the Lizardmen are very fond of magic and possibly the most powerful faction when it comes to such things, with the High Elves possibly squeaking in at second, although they could be first, it's hard to tell. They're both very powerful at it, but the Lizardmen have even more raw power, arguably speaking. Right, that's it. I have covered all the factions in Warhammer Fantasy, or at least all the factions that had supported models coming out at the time. There are more, such as Kislev, which I mentioned in a previous video, which might be getting an update, which will be great. You have the Chaos Dwarves, who are very much underloved, and they really need some new updates for their army. Hopefully Games Workshop will update the other factions, such as Nippon and Cathay, because I think a Japanese and Chinese and Indian styles armies would be very interesting to see in the old world. But anyway, did you like this video? Are you interested in learning more about some of these races? If so, put a little comment down below, like and subscribe, and I will get to that video as soon as I can. In the meantime, take care everyone.